Hi, friends and family. Today, we're going to talk about a very delicate subject, especially here in the state of Florida, pronouns. How do we teach our children, especially those that are delayed in expressive language, true pronouns? In our field, especially with those that are on autism spectrum disorder, that wonderful spectrum of greatness, they have sometimes a hard time differentiating he, she, him, her, and not in the world that we're all dealing with today, but because they truly get them mixed up. So imagine if we're trying to teach pronouns in the elementary school, and yet we're combating the advertising right now that's crossing all social media platforms. What do we actually teach our kids? He, she, they, them. Where do we go as parents? Come on back to the Purple Couch Podcast. We're going to give you some ideas, some tips, and some tricks to how do we surf the world of pronouns.
Welcome to the Purple Couch Podcast, hosted by Pamela Furr, co-hosted by Dr. Manny Rodriguez and Melissa Owen. Together, we dive deep into discussions around education, neurodiversity, autism, and applied behavior analysis. Click and subscribe today so you don't miss out on any future episodes.
Hi, friends and family. Today, we're talking about pronouns. He, she, they, them, her, him, z. There's a whole bunch more now.
Any more?
Yeah.
Probably.
Mix. We had our own. We made our own here at Puzzle Box.
Mm-hmm.
But we want to talk on the aspects of our children and how do we teach our children proper pronouns in today's world. It's a very sensitive subject. We talk about freedom of speech.
Yeah.
We talk about individual rights and responsibilities. But as an educator and as a parent coming into this, how do we ensure that we are teaching our children so that they can effectively communicate when they're in a social environment?
Mm-hmm.
So that's what we want to discuss today, because in the world right now, everyone is so offended.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone. And I think that's why we have to discuss this and why we've even had questions within our own staff. What do we do? How do we handle it?
Mm-hmm.
We've had questions with our teaching and our RBTs, registered behavioral technicians. How do we teach pronouns? You know, right now, our struggle in the ASD world,
Mm-hmm.
autism spectrum world, is a lot of times our children that are delayed in expressive language, mix them up.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Mrs. Manny, Mr. Missy. You know, there's no they, Pam. It's just Pam, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But our children, they cannot, and when I say cannot, it's at their own independently, recognize those terms.
Mm-hmm.
So they mix them and match a lot of times. I think my son was 13 when finally he got it all locked down. And it wasn't for the lack of intelligence. It simply is, well, is it a they? Is it a them? Is it a she? Is it a her? Is it a he? Is it a his? Where do we go from there? And when we're talking about core educational concepts, where do we fall in the line of social responsibility versus academic responsibility?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, it's something, so like myself, I've had debates with my RBTs about this because a lot of us, we do obviously want to teach the kids the correct pronouns. That way, when they are conversating with others, they use them correctly and don't say, like, oh yeah, he did this yesterday, because that immediately you pick up on that and you notice.
correct.
But as you've said, it's with society today, how do we know how to teach these anymore?
It's so,
Love your opinion.
well, okay. Here we go. Again, Loki, I love you. And I hope that when you're 30 years old, that you won't despise your mom for bringing up all of our cobwebs in our closet. So we had this discussion in our house.
Mm-hmm.
So my son is very socially aware. He at one point came to me and we had a conversation because he wanted to know, hey, Mom, I would like to be called all pronouns. All of them? Yes. He, she, they, them, her, him, all of it. I want to be called all pronouns. I don't want to literally be labeled by any pronouns. I'm just going to take all of them. Now, I'm cooking dinner when this conversation comes up. And it was out of the blue. And again, it's because we have this open relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And so I told him, I said, okay, I need a moment to think this through. I was like, you kind of caught me off guard. Again, my son considers himself non-binary in his relationships. He falls in love with the person and not their sex, which I again commend. I love my kid to death. And I think that's what all parents want. They just want our children to be happy, to find joy in someone that respects them and protects them, so I'm completely fine with that. But the pronoun issue took me for a whirl. And I told him, I said, Loki, let me approach this in 3 different aspects. 1, as a mom, your mom. 2, as an educator, as an administrator of a private school in the state of Florida. I'm going to answer you as an administrator. And then I'm also going to answer you as a woman. So I think that's the best way I can answer you.
Yeah.
And it would be the way that I would answer any of my staff that came to me. So we have to, and Manny, jump in here with the OBM side at any time. Notice I'm going crisscross applesauce here on this one. Why? Because it's delicate. This topic that we're talking about offends a lot of people. I mean, as the CFO and CEO of a company, I'm called the janitor. Hey, you, I'm the babysitter. I'm the teacher. I am the therapist. I am the janitor. I am the kitchen worker. For me personally, it does not. He, she, they, them, it doesn't bother me one way or another. I'm a human being. I'm a human being who organically was born as a female. I have all female parts. So when I answer this question to you all, to my friends and family out there, please understand that this is my opinion. Everyone, just like we approach this at our school and at our clinic, we respect everyone's authority to make their own decisions. And that includes your sexuality. That includes, the way that you handle it within your own personal home. I'm just going to give you the feedback as an administrator of a school in the state of Florida, as well as a mom and a woman. And again, my personal preferences here. So to my staff that asked that, just like I'll tell you what I told Loki, but to the staff, as an academic facility in elementary, and when I say elementary, I would go preschool all the way up to 5th grade. And the reason I say 5th grade is because there are middle schools, there are junior highs, there are senior highs. But when we start talking about 12, 13-year-olds, which normally, fall into that 5th, 6th grade, when we start going through puberty, when the hair on the legs start to grow, hair underneath the armpits start to grow. And that doesn't matter if you're male or female. And guys, how about we start talking about the 3rd gender? For me, personally, I find offense in this because there is another gender. It's called hermaphrodites. They're born with both gender parts. And as a society, I am offended for them.
Yeah, they never get mentioned or talked about.
No, not at all. And can you imagine how their life is? Because where do they fall? Where does this fall in for them? But we're not discussing that. But everyone else can be offended. So, we need to tread carefully. And that's why I say this is all personal preferences. But as an academic administrator in elementary and preschool, we are teaching biology. We are teaching basic human science. Basic human science is to teach he and she specific to the gender. In the state of Florida, if I am not allowed to call an elementary student a he because they are identifying as a he when they're really a biological she, then I have to follow the laws. And I would recommend that to any administrator across the United States or worldwide. You need to follow your local, state, federal laws. That's very important. And the reason I say that is because you have to remember that you are not looking out for just one child. As an administrator and as an employee, we're looking out for all the children within that environment. Now, once we get into the world of puberty, when children are starting to figure out these lessons, when parents are starting to identify, and well, there may be, hey, she may be more of a he genetically, there may be something going on, or hey, my kid just identifies. I have an older sister that's very masculine, is fully in her masculine. And so I understand that firsthand. So this is, again, going back to what are we teaching? We're teaching genetics. We're teaching biology. 1 and 1, when they are put together, equal 2 representations. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yep.
So if we are going back to those core standards, that's what we have to teach and that's what we have to implement. Again, there will always be those outside of the category, or boxes where a parent comes in, and that is their child. And if the parent comes to us and says, Johnny is now Jill, we would appreciate it if the school would implement her preference. Okay? Johnny is now Jill. Jill is now her. In that standing, again, I need to let you all know, we are blessed because at Puzzle Box, we do not have shared stall bathrooms. But you have to look at the legality as the administrator of the school, allowing boys into the bathroom where there's a girl. I have to take and protect all of my students.
Right.
And by protecting all of the students, then that means you have the conversation. Well, Dr. Manny, I appreciate that. And I will call little Johnny Jill at your recommendation. But we still, according to the state, must require, because shot records, because of his admission records, he is still a boy in the state's eyes. Therefore, he must use the boys' bathroom.
Yep.
That's how I would handle it on the elementary side.
Okay.
The reason I say that is because in our junior, senior high, we have that a lot. I mean, we've got every, I think, gender, even as employees. We have male, we have female, we have they, we have them, we have some transgender, we have every sexuality under the sun, LGBTQR. Man, I told you when we started this podcast, we are the alphabet soup.
Yep.
So in our workplace, we had that happen, didn't we, here at the high school with one of our employees?
Yeah, the employee was very open to us from the beginning, from the interview date, from the beginning, that did not recognize themselves as a he or she. It was all of the above.
Yes.
And wanted to be referred to as mix. And we believe one of the things that ties to everything we're talking about is, especially for adults working in the workplace, is does the company value acceptance? That's a value. It's a core value of any company, and to parents too, to value acceptance. And so for us, we value acceptance. We were honoring that. So we openly accepted this individual to our team. And not only that, we reinforced it to our students to understand this person's preference. So the students in turn called this individual Mix, and for respect of privacy, we'll say Z. And so Mix Z was the
Exactly.
teacher, and is the teacher, and was wonderful. And the students, and they just accepted each other.
Correct.
Not dissimilar to, we also have a student that here in our high school that legally, as you said, per all birth records and everything, is a female, but recognizes themselves as a male and prefers to be using a male name.
Correct.
Or a name that's more universally accepted as a male. And everybody just accepts it from day one.
Exactly.
And I think that's as a parent, but also as an employer, as a business person, as an employee, it all comes down to acceptance. And if acceptance is not a core value for the parent, because how many parents are out there in the world that don't accept it?
100%.
And knowing that up front is really important.
Absolutely.
Missy and I was just talking about that in terms of clinically, when do you draw a line of whether or not to teach the pronouns or not? And I think at the early ages, we do have to ask the parents about their values. Because if the parents don't want to reinforce it, then we always fall back to the education side first. Like what's the guardrails? But then if, let's say, the family is very open and accepting and wants to reinforce that education, then we can go that.
I'm going to play devil's advocate on that. If you have a 5 or 6-year-old that is having problems identifying the proper pronouns to begin with, then you're asking for confusion.
Oh, and it's always like,
So if you're having, as an administrator, a therapist, whether it's an occupational therapist, a BCBA, a speech therapist, whether you're a teacher, whether you're just an employer, and you're having these conversations, I think the biggest value is to sit down, because it could be an RBT that identifies as a they, them, and you're asking them to go against their standard and teach a male child he, him. And so how do we do that without crossing the boundaries? Well, what you do is you talk to the open family and you let them know that the first thing we need to do is make sure that little Johnny or little Jill actually understand the concept. Because if we are not understanding the concept, then we are just following the social media train.
That's right. Yeah.
So then are we really making independent decisions and calls, or are we just following the social? And that tunes me to how I answered Loki.
Yeah. Okay.
Ooh.
So it's so funny that you triggered into there. So here you go, guys.
Unscripted.
This is, exactly. Again, I love how this happens.
Well, that's why, again, we, just kind of, before you go to your Loki story, that's why a lot of people say, we're getting a lot of value out of this. So it's a good opportunity to say, if you're getting value, you think other people would get value out of this conversation, and you're about to hear another Loki story, which usually triggers a lot of informational sharing. Please like, subscribe, and share the Purple Couch podcast.
I'm going to have Loki come be on the podcast.
Oh,
I think it's needed, especially because of this conversation.
Actually, I think it would be a good perspective to bring to this conversation.
Absolutely. Part two coming soon. I just want you to know. So let me wrap up this show with how I handled this conversation as a mom. So my son is explaining this. And I want to say my son is non-binary. So he identifies as the person, and he's had relationships with they, them, again, my son will correct me in my terminology here with, male identifying as a female, female identifying as a male. Again, it comes down to the person for him. So we've had very open conversations in regards to this previous, to lead up to the conversation he asked me about using all pronouns. And so as a mom, I told him this: I love you. I want you to be happy. I don't care if you want to identify as a purple dinosaur or identify into any form or figure that's legal, then you can identify all day long. Because if that's how you feel, who am I to tell you to feel anything differently? And I think that's very key, no matter what conversation you're having, is to remember that a person's feelings cannot be dictated by anybody else. Even if they have a mental health issue, their feelings are still validated within themselves. So we need to make sure that whenever anyone talks about their feelings, that you understand that that's not personal to you.
Absolutely.
But it is to them. So again, he wanted to do all of these wonderful pronouns. And so I said, well, you can be Barney the purple dinosaur as far as I'm concerned. And if you want me to, go with the flow and serve you, greens because dinosaurs eat greens, or if you're a herbivore or if you're a carnivore, I'm like, okay, just let me know. He thought that was cute. And I said, but again, as your mom, I also know the struggle that my generation and the generations before me had in being accepted in their own sexual identity. So I would never want my son to struggle like that, ever. So as a mom, there you go. I just love you to death. I would support you in any way, shape, or form for whatever way that you want to identify. Do I have an issue as a mom because you have no feminine traits within you? Absolutely. And we'll get to that in a second.
Quick question. How old was Loki?
This conversation?
Yeah.
Oh, 17.
Oh, so okay.
Oh, yes. He's 17 when he's 18 now, but this was last year before his birthday. And so we're not talking, this is again, 17-year-old, truly engaged, social, So I'm like, okay, so as a mom, and I was like, and Loki, if you identified as a female, I would nurture that in you because he's at that age to understand this. And I was like, but you have no feminine characteristics or traits. So I'm confused with why you would identify. And I said, and that concerns me as a mom. Number 2, as an administrator of the school, I would let you know that you are biologically a male. You were born with male parts, you were born with male hormones, that you are biologically a male. Therefore, I would have a problem with you using female pronouns. If you identify as they, them, I'm okay with that. He, him, I'm okay with that. But I see no feminine traits to identify with a she, her. So as an administrator of school, these are the things that I have to process. And I said, but again, remember, we have an open conversation. I said, now let me talk to you as a woman. As a woman, I'm really pissed because you've got to work in order to be a she, her. Sorry, you just don't get to say, I'm going to call myself all pronouns. I'm standing up for all the transgender male, females, female, males, because it's a process and it's a struggle. It upsets me as a woman because the chemicals, the hormones, the bras, the underwear, the heels, the menstrual cycle, all of these things that women identify and deal with, to just say, I'm just going to blanket call myself every pronoun, I'm offended. And I have the right, just like everyone else has the right to be offended. So Loki comes back and he's looking at me like, okay, Mom, calm down a little, calm down. I was like, no, I'm not, because this is the evidence of just like what you were saying is that why are we doing this?
Right.
Just like Mix Z, they struggled. The identity crisis was not something that they wanted, and it is something that they struggle with.
Right.
Those that are struggling with their gender identity, it is just that, a struggle.
Right.
So I find offense when people just want to catch on the social media bandwagon.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden they're transgender, or all of a sudden they're gay, all of a sudden they're oh, I'm bisexual now. And why? Explain to me what makes you this way. And it's, oh, well, because my friends. And that's what sets me off. And I think that it's disrespectful to all the true gender neutral people that are in the world today. I think it's disrespectful for those that are truly struggling with gender identity, and for those in the past that have led the way to where we can have these discussions. You know, the generations that had to hide, the generations that were afraid to go to baseball games or football games in their true self.
Yeah, not to mention the people that struggled with bullying.
Yes.
Because they were
Yes.
dealing with it.
You know, these are the things that our children don't realize. And social media is not forecasting, and they're not showing. Let's talk about history. Why do we have the freedoms that we have right now? You know, it's so easy for us to complain and to complain and to complain. But as a society, for us to be in the situation we currently are with these freedoms, to even have a podcast discussing pronouns, we have to give some credit to those that came before us.
Oh, 50 years ago is when it happened. Even 30.
Oh, what are you talking about?
20.
Come on now, Missy. This youngin' over here. Oh my goodness, I haven't hit 50 yet, but even my generation, my sister's generation, my older sister is less than a year ahead of me. And she struggled during school. You know, I've got another friend of mine, a gentleman that identifies as a female, and he's probably 55, 56 now. And it was horrible for him. Depression, anxiety. I think more than once he had questioned, suicide. And it was because he couldn't be who he was at that time. So I would just ask all of our audience that when you have these conversations, when you talk about any type of personal preference, that we look at it from multiple approaches. Everyone needs education. The only time that we become ignorant is when we put other people's ideas and views to the side because we're not educated. So when you sit down, when you have these discussions with your educators, with your therapist, with your children, with your family and friends, come in it with an open mind, but don't be afraid to question and ask. And remember, those questions that you're asking for, Give me that cause. Tell me why, Manny. Why do you want me to call you Miss Rodriguez? Tell me why. Help me understand. If it's your personal preference, then hey, that's all you need to say is that, Pam, this is my personal preference. I feel good in myself being called a Mrs. Okay, high five.
Yep.
Miss Manny, here we go. Let's go to the baseball game. But again, it's the personal preference, and it's being able to have a two-way conversation, not a one-way conversation. Freedom of speech works both ways. Also, I ask all of my educators out there to be compassionate, be empathetic, and understand these are all new days. There's no handbook that's written for the pages that are to come ahead. So if you like this podcast, please hit a thumbs up. If you know friends or family or loved ones that could benefit from this information, please share. Come back next week and you'll see us here at the Purple Couch Podcast.